Testing 1 2. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I'm clear. We're about to start Kenyan Port Validation Work. Yep. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. This is the Kenya Validation Workshop. I'm happy for today's session. My name is Abdi Agena. I'm a business journalist and with a keen interest on matters to do with the global trade. And of course, I'm quite excited to be part of this very important session today. And before we start it off, I'd like to just one huge number of participants. We are just at about around 50 participants so far, and this is quite exciting for the afternoon. Well, let me begin by reminding all of us that by Pangea Trust, alongside CEDA, they will be helping us unpack more details into this out of this report. And I'd like to remind us with this particular session also, we're getting more of you sending in your feedback on social media platforms. Let me quickly walk us through our handles for today. And we have hashtag Kenya Validation Workshop, and also have the Diaspora Remittances. And of course, our other hashtag is Kenyans Living in. Well, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to invite everyone, Managing Director for Pangea Trust, that is Madam Annie Lai, for opening remarks and also to set the stage for us.
Sorry, we're just waiting for the
the technical switch. Glad to be here, quite exciting, the journey that we have been. As you have heard, my name is Anne Lawi, Managing Director of Pangea Trust, and we are honored and delighted to host all of you today. And it has been a journey to be where we are with Diaspora investment partnerships that we are executing with SIDA. And for that, we would want to have special appreciation to our partner SIDA and other partners who we have worked with on this journey to be where we are today. It's such a big day for us to be able to announce and share insight and finding of this validation on this validation session on Diaspora mapping study for Kenya that we were able to carry out between April and June this year. And this is part of the huge pilot that we are carrying out for this year, touching on Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia. And part of the program was to ensure that we carry out diaspora remittance study to be able to understand the inflow and utilization of diaspora remittance inflows into the country, but also to be able to get insights in terms of how we can be able to increase access to investment opportunities for startup and high growth businesses in Africa. So just a quick brief of who we are. Pangea Trust and Diaspora Remittances to add impact-driven startup in Africa. And we do this to empower them for impact, people, and profits. For the last a couple of years, we have worked with more than 150 African founded startups, and 46 of those that we have worked with are women founded, and those that we have invested in have been able to 15x their investment. Next slide, please. And this is very instrumental for us as a trust to be able to, one, establish on how, or rather be able to create alternative investment mechanism that can be able to drive investment across Africa. I'm sorry, I can see my presentation is a bit distorted, hope you bear with me, but I wanted to also give some numbers in terms of why we are doing what we are doing. And startup and MSMEs represent 95% of business registered globally, which is a huge number, and 35% contribute, and they contribute more than 35% of global GDP. They also account for more than 50% of jobs across the globe. Yet, despite all these benefits, startup and small enterprises remain significantly underserved by financial institutions or existing finance mechanisms. And it's estimated up to 70% of startups and SMEs are experiencing a financing gap of more than 285 billion across sub-Saharan. These numbers are staggering, and that's why as Pangea, we are committed to changing investment landscape and providing investment mechanism that can be able to address this gap. Next slide, please. There are key contributing factors into why this scenario is the way it is. And one of the reasons is that there is lack of understanding on how to position and unlock different investment mechanisms for businesses. There is also lack of access to right information and make right decision when it comes to investments. That means if, for example, you have a little bit of disposable income, how do I even be able to make a decision to invest? The other reason, contributing factor to these gaps is lack of sufficient alternative mechanism and platform to drive innovation. And these also have been, again, reiterated as part of the finding that we have been able to get out of the reports that will be some of the findings that we'll be sharing today. And a key one also is lack of linkages and referrals to the investments. Next slide, please. And that's where we see a huge opportunity to be able to mobilize diaspora remittances as an alternative investment mechanism for African-founded businesses. We see this as a huge opportunity, considering that inflows to Africa have surpassed direct investment and foreign aid to become the largest source of income capital. So to us, diaspora remittances becomes the investment opportunity for the next frontier and for the businesses that we need to grow to the next level. We see this as a huge opportunity because particularly for Kenya, where we have focused for this diaspora remittance study, more than 4 million Kenyans live abroad, constituting the diaspora community. And in 2020, World Bank estimated that $3.1 billion were the inflow to Kenya from different sources in diaspora. And that is estimated to increase to 4 to 6% in 2021. However, it's only less than 5% of those remittances that are set aside as investment. And we are going to see why is that. Is it that because there are no investment opportunities? I don't think so, because the report shows clearly there are, but there is a huge disconnect between the availability, those who are able to make diaspora remittances inflow into the country, and existing businesses that we can make investment decisions. And that's where we come in at the need to ensure that we provide the information. And with this, we hope to be able to increase the share of remittances set aside to from 25 to 30% in 2030. That using 3.1 billion as a base figure will translate to 900 million only if this was to be a success, and which we hope it will be a success. Next slide, please. To be able to do this, we have also seen that there is a huge opportunity when it comes to Islamic finance as an opportunity. Globally, Islamic finance market has been, it's estimated to be 2.5 billion industry, and that is a huge opportunity right there for us to be able to unlock. It's also in Africa, we have 1.3 billion people, and 53% of those are Muslim, meaning that there is a huge opportunity in the market that we can tap and provide investment opportunities for these demographic that exist. However, very few opportunity exists for facilitating investment in startup and SMEs across Africa that are Islamic finance, or they are factoring in Sharia compliant. Next slide, please. As Pangea Trust, we see, and that's why we are implementing this project with CEDA, and we see a huge opportunity through this initiative we are implementing, and we strive to be able to bring together African diaspora investors, startups, and high growth businesses in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia to be able to create an innovative digital platform targeting to unlock diaspora remittances, and also be able to create a framework that can be able to channel this investment to the businesses that will be selected, done thorough due diligence, and be able to facilitate capacity build the businesses to be investor ready. Kindly, if you can move to the next slide. Sorry again, my slide has so distorted, I think, from the projection. The key project activities for this initiative include diaspora remittance mapping for Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia. Part of what we are doing currently is to share the findings and recommendations from diaspora mapping report that we have done for Kenya, and the information and the insights that we have been able to collate from this report will be utilized to inform the innovative fundraising platform that we are putting together. So we are not just doing the report, we are using data to inform how can we put a vehicle that can be able to unlock these diaspora remittances as investment? Another key pillar for this project is institutional partnership, where we are exploring to work with different partners. And that's why we are having this stakeholder validation workshop in the first place, to be able to bring along partners who can help us scale this across Africa. And also a key pillar, as I have mentioned, also is finance, Islamic finance. How do we create a mechanism that is Sharia compliance to invest in Sharia compliance business across Africa? The next slide. Now zeroing in on why we are here today, the key activity for today and the focus of today's discussion is diaspora remittance mapping study. And our key focus for this, and I don't want to go into details because the consultants that we have engaged with Samawati and Blue Ventures, and also for Islamic financing, we had Rahma, Resi, and Fiona, who will be taking us through what are the key findings in terms of status of remittance to Africa, starting with Kenya, which we will be looking into shortly, and what are the channels, what are the motivations, what are the attitude that can drive investment across Africa. So it's us trying to break it down. So what is that we can consider and turn it into a platform that can be able to drive these remittances. We have seen, and they will be able to share some of those insights because they are very interesting findings. For example, a huge number of diaspora networks felt that they would want to do investment, but they are not doing investment. So we want to find out why is such. Also, the other aspect of the reports that we were looking into is investment appetite and the drivers. So how can we increase more, setting aside of remittances as investments? What are those things that we need to put in place to drive that? The other key aspect is also challenges and opportunities in unlocking diaspora as investment. So what are those things that we need to put in consideration even as we build the platform, even as we engage different partners and stakeholders? What are those challenges that we need to be aware of, and what remedies or mechanisms we are putting in place to be able to address that? And the final one is Islamic financing. What are the opportunities and key drivers that can be able to deliver on this? So in a nutshell, those are the key pillars and specific areas that we are working on. Obviously, there are so many other interesting findings that we'll be sharing with you today, but I just wanted to give an overview to be able to set the conversation going. So thank you so much. Over to you, Abby.
All right, thank you for setting the stage for us, and very pertinent issues you raised in the presentation that literally ushers us into the next session. And at this juncture, I'd like us to dive in and get some other perspectives into this report. I want to get from Samawati Capital. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I want to get into Sida. Sida will be walking us through this next session. And we're really delighted to have with us the representation from Sida. I'd like her to quickly introduce herself as we go to remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Sophie Berghall. I work at the Africa department at the Sida headquarters in Stockholm. And I'm part of a project team at the Sida headquarters together with MSc colleagues, working in this partnership with Pangea Trust. So thank you for the kind introduction and good afternoon to all of you. Sida is a Sweden agency for international development cooperation. As a development financier, but also as a close collaboration partner, we are ready to co-create with you to build on the findings based on the Diaspora mapping report. We therefore very much welcome this validation report workshop. SIDA's geographical main focus is Africa. We have national cooperation agreements with 15 countries in Africa, and Kenya is one of these prioritized countries. We commit to contribute to development results in these countries in such areas as climate and environment, human rights and democracy, health, social protection, resilience, and economic growth. National development in any country requires a combination of various financial resources. One such untapped financial resources are remittances. We need to find ways to leverage these financial flows. The report presents that remittance inflows to Kenya rose to a record high of US dollars 3.09 billion in 2020, accounting for 3% of the GDP. This is a substantial financial flow, or even a very substantial financial flow. We at SIDA, we see the diaspora as a largely untapped resource for inclusive economic growth and job creation in development countries. I really appreciate how the report succeeds to bring out findings not only relevant for this specific initiative, but also to increase the overall awareness of the role of the diaspora and remittances. What you now are doing in Kenya is of global importance and interest. SIDA's collaboration in this partnership aims to enable Pangea Trust to mobilize the diaspora in Africa, but also globally, building on the experiences that we are now gaining together in Kenya. For the world to reach the 2030 sustainable goals, Sweden has committed to engage with new partners. The diaspora constitutes one of these. The world is rapidly changing, and Swedish development cooperation needs to be flexible to meet challenges and identify new opportunities. Together with new partners, we want to test and develop new innovative solutions to combat poverty and inequality. Again, I welcome all of you to this workshop, and I really appreciate your contribution to this initiative. We are here today to tap into your work and to your knowledge, since you know how we best can be relevant to the Kenya country context. We therefore, in particular, look forward to learn more from each and every one of you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Sophie Baghal, Senior Advisor for Private Sector Development. Interesting the trends that you have pointed for us, and of course, reassuring of the Swedish commitment towards ensure that we have the best outcomes and we are able to further deepen financial inclusion within the continent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like us to move to our next speaker this afternoon, and I would like to invite now on stage a presentation that will be giving us an overview, really, and a deep dive into the report that was put together by Asymmetry Capital, Blue Venture, and Rama Islamic Finance. And this next session will be quite interesting, and of course, I hope all of us are glued and ready to partake of the key aspects that are coming out of the report. And to take us through this, we have Mr. Samuel Ndonga, who will be walking us through this, as well as Jeff Temba and Rama Hersey. But we want to start off with Samuel. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. So I will start off, and then Jeff and Rama will join in later. So basically, just to give a high level overview in terms of the objectives of the study, as well as the design, and then go into the specific slides. So really, our client being Pangea and of course CEDA, who sponsored the study, really wanted to address one major gap, and this is really the fact that there's very limited studies in the public domain on the uses of remittances in terms of across consumption, across investment and other uses, and specifically also the attitudes and behaviors that influence the decision on remittance, as well as just on how to utilize the same. So the aim of the study really was trying to understand these attitudes and behaviors, as Anne mentioned, but also specifically trying to focus that on investments into SMEs. So we targeted sort of like 3 population subgroups. This is really Kenyans, Kenyan diaspora, other African diaspora who have an interest or have a link in Kenya in one form or shape. They have connections here, they have investments here, or any other interest, but also generally also both Kenyan and non-Kenyan African diaspora who confess the Islamic faith, because also the Islamic finance topic is very critical. So because of that type of population, so it was not possible to really have a specific sampling frame, and so we use as purposive sampling techniques, and we're able to get about 211 respondents from the surveys, with 59 of them being Kenyan diaspora, 68 being other African diaspora with a link to Kenya, and 84 being generally Africans who confess the Islamic faith. Second to that, also we had about key informant interviews about 11 experts, ranging across different topics in the regulations, technology, payments, banking, remittances, and all that. And in terms of the demographics, with about 55% of the respondents being male, 43% being female, 2% prefer not to say. A bigger chunk of the respondents were between 31 to 40 years old, about 40% of that. And 72% were what you classify as first-generation immigrants. So these are really people who were born in Africa and then immigrated into the diaspora. The study covered about 27 countries across Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia, North America, with Sweden, Finland, and the USA accounting for about 54% of the respondents. So really going to the specifics of the study, looking at going to the first slide, targeting really looking at the growth of remittances. I think one of the things we've seen is that over the last 8 years, as has already been showed, remittances into Kenya, as according to the CBK, Central Bank of Kenya, have sort of like had an average annual average growth of about 14%. So basically, they've been growing over the years. And interestingly, even in 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, we saw a 10.7% growth if you compare to the volume of funds that came in 2019. And actually, just to show just how much the remittances are growing, the latest report as at September 2021 shows that if you compare the volume of remittances that have come in between January 2021 to September 2021, and compare the same volume as at last year, there's actually a 20% growth. So remittances are presenting a really interesting opportunity for African countries, including Kenya, to basically earn foreign exchange. And the World Bank projects that remittances will end up being one of the largest, actually, if not the largest source of foreign exchange, even overtaking foreign direct investment. And I think what is interesting also, for us, we wanted to understand, especially around COVID, what was really the key, what really enabled this growth, despite the fact that especially in the West and other markets where the diaspora are based, there were lockdowns, COVID was really, there were a lot of lockdowns because of COVID. We still experienced a 10.7% growth in that year. CBK, indicates that, the financial innovations in Kenya, around M-Pesa, integration of M-Pesa into, banking, payment platforms and all that, really enabled Kenyans to send money. So despite them being locked down, they were still able to send money to their families back at home and their friends, from the comfort of their home, from the online and all that. So it really acted as an enabler. But we wanted to understand also more beyond just technology being an enabler. Could there be other factors? Based on our key informant interviews and the survey, one of the two things we picked up, and potentially need to be investigated further to try and understand what are some of these drivers. One was the diaspora just seeing the impact of COVID in the countries where they're based, and just looking at how the health system was impacted. You hear countries like in the US, the bed space is not enough, resources are not sufficient. That in a way kind of like drove them to want to send more money back home to ensure that their families are safe, are able to get access to healthcare if possible, given that the fact that the healthcare system in our country is not that well developed, so may not always depend on government public systems. The other explanation that we got also again also needs to be verified also was the fact that most of the African diaspora also largely works on what you typically call first line jobs, nursing, tracking, and all that. And there were a lot of opportunities that actually emerged because of COVID in these spaces. And so, many of them either were able to still secure their jobs, and some of them were able to secure even second or third jobs next to what they already do. Moving to the next slide. I think also I wanted to understand also was just issue around the frequency, volume, and use and motivation of remittances. And in terms of frequency, 78% of the respondents indicated that they regularly send money back home, with 50% of them indicating that they send money at least once a month. So you can see there's quite a bit of there's a high frequency of the remittances from based on the respondents. And a bigger chunk of this money, about 49% of this money, was actually going into to support the family, financial support to the family, to their families and friends, with a bigger chunk of that actually going into consumption. So as much as a bigger chunk of the money was going into financial support for family and friends, a large part of that was going into consumption, with about 15% of that going into investments. And we'll try and show what kind of investments they were making, they reported as making as we move on. In terms of really the behavior around from a gender perspective, based on the study, men seem to send more funds than women. Not to indicate that women were not sending money or less frequently than the men, but from the respondents, it seemed like more men. And when you look actually the split in terms of the respondents were almost equally split between men and female. So in a sense, these responses are somehow kind of like representative. Men were sending more funds than women, with most women sending less than $500 at a time, compared to men who are sending more than $1,000. But this is largely also influenced by the motivation. So it's not an issue of whether men or women potentially have more money than the other. It's really around the motivation. So it seemed like men were largely motivated by, were largely opportunistic. To are trying to largely seeking opportunities to invest their money. So sort of like rent seeking opportunities, whereas women were largely motivated by sending money to sort of compensate for the low economic conditions back home, try and support the families in terms of, meeting healthcare needs, meeting, consumption needs. So in that sense, you find, money for investment would tend to be a bit, larger in terms of, average ticket sizes. And really in terms of demographics, as I mentioned earlier, majority of the respondents were, those ones who reported to be sending money more frequently and were largely between 31 to 40 years of age. So these are people who are largely established, either have finished school or have a number of years work experience. They, at this age, mostly you're establishing or already establishing your career, earning reasonably well, depending on what exactly you're doing. Slide number 3, moving on. Just before we move to slide number 3, I think the other thing also was, and that's very important. I think that's something also we need to, something to look into deeply was the first generation diaspora. And first generation here, as I mentioned, means those who were born in Africa and immigrated afterwards into the West. they seem to send more money than the second generation and third generation. So I think a question there maybe to dig further on is it because they have stronger family and cultural connections back home? Is it because they have a better appreciation of the local context and the needs? So maybe that's something to look into and really see how do we encourage increased remittances from the second and third generation African diaspora. Moving to slide number 3. I'm not sure they were still projecting. I seem to have lost the presentation on my end.
Probably you can just carry on as we sort it out on the presenter's side. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Really, the other aspect to try to look at was really the choice in terms of the channel of remittance. What was the, what was the preferred choice, and what was the motivation behind this? And of course, it seemed like digital platforms are critical. Whether it's online, whether it's mobile based, seem to be critical and important. But I think really what informed the decision on how to send money was largely around convenience being top priority, and cost of transaction coming after that. And convenience really is largely around ease of access. So when we went in, we thought convenience will largely be influenced by the remitter. But what we found actually from the study is that as much as we didn't speak to the recipients, based on the conversations with the diaspora and asking them, how they made a decision on which channel to use, what came out surprisingly was that convenience was largely interpreted from the recipient's perspective. How easy was it going to be for the recipient to receive the cash, as well as access it, and the ability of that money to be easily converted into cash. So either cash or near cash equivalent. Those were that was really an interesting insight that as much as the diaspora were keen on convenience from an ease of access perspective, ease of remittance, but they largely prioritize convenience from the recipient's perspective. But their mother, their sister, or their friends who they're sending money to can easily access that money as quickly as possible and as close to cash as possible. That's why if you look at the 54% of Kenyan diaspora preferred using M-Pesa, because of how perverse it is now in integration with banking systems, payment platforms, and all that. Whereas 48% of them, those respondents who profess the Islamic faith, preferred the hawalas, because also again quite easy to actually transmit, basically transfer funds to the recipients. Moving to the next slide. The other aspect also we looked at was really specifically the opportunity in terms of investment for business. Is there an opportunity to actually utilize this funding as a source of fund, as a source of capital for SMEs, as an opportunity for SMEs to access funding? So we looked at where are the diaspora investing? Do they have an interest? And if so, where are the opportunities? So if you look at the current situation as it is, so most of the respondents, what nature of current investments are they making when it comes to businesses? So 31% of them reported to actually channeling their funds into own businesses. So these are businesses that are based in Kenya, but where they have an interest, where they own the businesses. 28% of them reported sending this money to invest in their relatives' businesses, either to help them start up or provide them working capital or just investment capital, with 21% going into money market, and only about 12% going into other businesses where it's not their own businesses or their relative businesses. So the question is there an opportunity to grow this 12%, in terms of volumes? And really the respondent, based on the response, yes, it is, because 56% of them said they are willing to invest in SMEs that are not their own or linked to their relatives. So really where they can provide capital. But what is critical, and my colleague Jeff, when he steps in on his presentation is going to focus more on that. What they clearly said was that they need accurate, they need reliable and timely information on what these opportunities are, what the returns are, how their investments are going to be protected and all that. So they need reliable and timely information. When you look at the average amount of funding, they send for investments, on average, about $4,000 is sent for business investments, which is quite sizable. If you look at where the funding gap is right now within the SME sector, the SME space, according to the Institute for Development Studies, they estimate that the funding gap for SMEs is anywhere between $5,000 to $100,000. So you can see if that is a funding gap, and the diaspora are sending on average $4,000 for investments, there's an opportunity to actually tap on that opportunity, on that capital, and channel this funding into SMEs. But for them to do that, they really have market and above return expectations. So they're not just saying, we're willing to send money for the sake of sending money. They also expect that they will get at least market, if not above market returns. So that means then we have to have a strong investment thesis. We have to have a strong investment management system in place to actually build the confidence and deliver the returns that are required. However, the motivation for them to do investments in businesses is beyond economics. Many of them reported other reasons. They want to contribute to building the nation. They want to contribute in improving the living conditions in country. And so that could easily be leveraged to try and mitigate against the return expectations as well. So I want to hand it over to my colleague Jeff to pick it from there and move on to slide 5. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Samuel. Very detailed breakdown there. And just to remind us all that we are now clocking close to 71 participants, and this is quite exciting. So let's get started, yeah?
Are we still? You need to unmute Jeff. Jeff seems to be muted on that end, so you need to unmute him. Just use it.
All right.
Okay, he just used my mic.
You'll have to switch off your mic, Samuel. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jeff, although there's an echo.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. Please proceed.
All right. I don't know if the slide is still being presented, but I'll just go ahead from where Sam left off. Just picking up from that. I think one of the biggest obstacles that we've observed from the research in terms of enabling investment for the diaspora is this twin challenge of one, what Sam had mentioned, that access to information. Whether that information is credible information, and whether there's knowledge of organizations that are out there that are trustworthy, whether to advise or to manage investments on behalf of the diaspora. So there's definitely a very high level of interest and a very high level of appetite from the diaspora. About 56% of the respondents that we interviewed, and this would be those that had never invested in Africa in the past, saying that they would be interested to start. For about 46% out of those who had some level of investment said they were extremely interested, should there be an opportunity for them to invest in Africa again, or through some type of investment vehicle, saying that they're very extremely interested. But the one challenge that exists for the majority of them is just this issue of information or the access to it, which therefore means that the access to and the availability to the right information, is a very significant factor and significantly impacts their decision to invest or not, and therefore cannot be overemphasized. What we found out is that because of that lack of information or access to it, then you find a majority of the diaspora who ended investing relied mostly on family or friends, about 36%. So there has majority there, or would look into social media and websites, or maybe seek information out of diaspora associations that they were members to, or friends within those diaspora associations in those countries, just to find information. And what was interesting is that those that relied on financial institutions based in the home countries, a very few percentage of them, about 8%, relied on those institutions existing in home countries to make their decisions. So there's definitely a huge gap, which speaks to that fact that despite the fact that there's a lot of interest out of the diaspora to invest locally, they are not getting matched into the right institutions or into the right pieces of knowledge that could enable them to make investments, which therefore means, at least for us, looking at this initiative and how this initiative is being built up, it basically highlights how important it would be for Pangea in the creation of the platform, just to be able to present themselves as a credible and trustworthy partner to the diaspora, which is of most importance. In fact, one of the real estate companies that was mentioned quite a lot by some of the diaspora members that we interviewed and other key informant interviewees was Optiven. And I think one of the reasons why this was mentioned, the organization was mentioned, was just because they had been found by members in the diaspora as having been able to successfully cultivate a relationship of trust, positioning themselves out there just for visibility and that. So it cannot be underscored, just to emphasize again the importance of information and access of that. I need to move to slide number 6, please. All right. So even though many of the surveyed diaspora had little knowledge, so we definitely found that there was a lot of them were interested in investing, but a lesser amount of the surveyed diaspora had knowledge of online investment platforms, such as the one that is being proposed here for development. Had very little information regarding such platforms or even experience using such platforms. But what was interesting is that even though this was true, then a majority of the diaspora actually have a very high affinity for technology and technology-enabled services, and are extremely exposed, widely exposed, and accustomed to using such services that within their resident countries, which therefore means that in terms of potential for adoption, there's definitely a heightened a sense of interest and a possibility for adoption for a proposed platform. But again, the value of technology here is definitely underscored. Just the fact that a technology-enabled platform, one of the reasons why, or some of the reasons why, such platforms bring a lot of value for investors or diaspora investors is that is that they can make information very widely and speedily accessible to them, which is much more than they're accustomed to, or other channels of information that they've used to get information about investments. It's also possible for them or such platforms to facilitate faster transactions in a faster, more convenient way, which again is something that a lot of diaspora are interested in having compared to, again, to existing methods of investment and how these are being facilitated or enabled. A lot of challenges there, just being difficult for them to, especially in instances where people are making direct investments either into their own business or businesses owned by members of families or other friends and relatives, or through other organizations that they have been linked to in one way or another. Finding challenges in being able to track information regarding the investment, where those investments stand. And so we find that, that a platform such as this has the ability to not only enable tracking of information and transactions, but give confidence to investors that their investments are safe and secure, and that they're able to utilize such platforms for that reason, in that manner. Slide number 7. Previous. Number 7. Okay. So we went about trying to understand what impacts country regulations would have on remittances and investments, especially those that were driven by technology-enabled platforms. So generally speaking, most investment or all investment-related products in Kenya would fall under the purview of the Capital Markets Authority, while remittance and payments would fall under the purview of the CBK. But what was most important in as far as regulation is concerned in relation to technology-enabled remittance investments is that was 3 things. One is that there is high levels of protection of the investor and their and their investments, and that 2, customer due diligence in relation to anti-money laundering requirements is effectively done, and then thirdly, all this KYC, anti-money laundering, and then the combating of financing terrorism regulations are highly adhered to. These things would be necessary in order to build not only comply with existing regulations around technology-enabled investments, but also to build trust within the diaspora community that these investments are very well regulated and fall under, the purview of regulatory bodies within, in the country, and as such, investments will be safe through vehicles such as this. The obvious impact here is that the implementation of such regulation would most definitely have an impact to the creation of the platform in terms of cost compliance, whether it's by licenses, monitoring, or reporting of transactions. So these are some things that really will need to be thought through in the subsequent levels, just to ensure that the level of compliance to regulation is at the highest. So speaking of opportunities for Pangea and its stakeholders, we definitely found through this process that yes, there is a high opportunity for investment from the diaspora, and not only that, that there's a high affinity for technology-enabled services, and so great effort will need to be made to create awareness on the proposed platform, and more importantly, that the opportunities that are available for investment will be clearly defined. Definitely, out of the sectors of interest that we looked at, some of the leading ones, including real estate, education, agriculture, I mean, the conventional sectors were of interest definitely to the diaspora, but a lot more diaspora are showing interest in investing outside of the conventional areas into other new, potentially new areas of investment. And so just to be able to create that wide variety or a wide portfolio of investment options, conventional and also for the Islamic.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd like to just interject a bit, and of course, a lot of insights from your presentation, and in the interest of time, allow us to allow our next speaker, Jeff, and I'm sure you'll have a couple of questions to take on following up a very insightful presentation. But I'd like to invite Rama Hersi.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, sorry. Am I good to go, Abby?
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I greet you all with the greetings of peace. It's a delight to be here and to have been part of this incredible initiative by my colleagues. And I will attempt to demystify what is considered a new or niche market, and is not actually a new or niche, but might be considered new and niche in the context of our region. So what is Islamic finance? As the name suggests, Islamic finance is finance that is based on religious or faith-based principles, and the faith here is Islamic. So it's a system consistent with Islamic law, and its underlying principles of the Islamic economy are fairness, equity, and justice. So the entire industry and process and the principles it's founded on are founded on these principles. And it's also considered an alternative source of resource mobilization, not just in the context that we're discussing, but in our global context, where we have a segment of our communities and societies who want to do business, receive their finances, give out their finances in line with their faith-based principles. Next slide. What are the distinguishing features of this industry? What makes it so different? So the first thing about Islamic finance is it always has to be asset-backed, meaning it must be tied to a real economy. What is being purchased must be known. The person who's purchased, you must own the product, and the person who's selling it must show proof of that. So it must be asset-backed, and it must be based on the real economy, which obviously then negates anything to do with hedging and the like. The key distinguishing feature, which everybody knows about Islamic finance, or has heard of it, is the prohibition of interest. This is fundamental to what Islamic finance stands for. And interest here is using money not just as a medium of exchange, but using money as the end goal. In Islamic finance, money is considered nothing but a medium of exchange, and not the essence of the transaction in of itself. And I don't think we have a lot of time to get into details, but I'm always happy to answer that in the question section. Once again, the other distinguishing factor of Islamic finance is restricted investments. Whereas we know we live in a world where, as an adult, as somebody who has capital or finances of their own, you can do and transact business as you like, obviously within certain parameters, legal parameters. Islamic finance goes a step further and says, whilst we understand that, the principle is any investments you do cannot go contrary to the Islamic legal principles. So it restricts the nature of the investments you can invest in or receive within the industry. It also prohibits extreme uncertainty and gambling, because Islamic finance, once again, remember, as I've mentioned earlier, is based on the principles of equity and justice and fairness. And so whilst there is an opportunity for making profit and making profit legally and within the confines of Islamic finance, there is a key distinguishing factor that says you cannot invest or gamble away your money, because this goes contrary to the principles of equity, fairness, and justice. There is an interesting element, which is another distinguishing feature of Islamic finance, and that is the concept of risk and reward sharing. When we do business together, as we enter the financial transaction, there is the way the contracts are structured, the way the transaction is structured, there has to be an element of risk and reward sharing, which again goes back to the underlying principle of the Islamic economy of equity and fairness and justice. Now, next slide. We discussed restricted investments. Now, what could potentially those be? There are prohibited activities within the Islamic faith that translates into Islamic finance, and that is you cannot do business in the interest-based financial service, which is an obvious. You cannot own or be in business in gambling, liquor, adult industry, arms and ammunition, tobacco, and pork. Why? Because these industries go contrary to the underlying principles of Islamic finance and in general Islamic law. Now, why is this important as an industry? Well, it's important to understand the value add of Islamic finance or the Islamic financial industry, because it is a $2.1 trillion industry. It has presence in over 75 countries, and there's over 450 financial institutions. And earlier, we had also seen what my colleagues had shared, that just within the region, we have a significant population and generally a younger population within Islam. So you have the markets, you have the industries, and you also have financial institutions and regulatory frameworks that supports the industry, ranging products from simple structured to wholesale, and is generally seen to be social impact driven. Next slide. Now, what made this industry grow? And this is all background for us to understand how significant Islamic finance is and why it really can serve as an alternative resource method, not just because of its faith-based principles for those who ascribe to the faith, but really as a value proposition in general. So the oil revenues of the Gulf countries, when that was the case, but continues to be, because a lot of these economies have been built on oil. They wanted their business and financial services to be done in line with Islamic finance. And then obviously the one that I have mentioned earlier and has been mentioned by others, the growth of the Muslim population, regulatory reforms, and this is not just within Muslim majority countries, this is also seen across other minority countries. So in the UK, for example, there has been amendments made to financial laws to allow for Islamic mortgages to work by removing, for example, the double stamped duty from the regulations. Similarly to our own country, Kenya, this has been done. You have in France where certain tax laws have been introduced or changed to allow for real estate investments and also the Islamic bond market to grow. You have countries such as Germany that have also allowed for certain changes to be made. In fact, Germany was the first country to have an Islamic bond back in the early 2000s as a way to offer alternative financial services. So regulatory reforms are happening all across different countries. And this is not only, once again, as I've mentioned, Muslim majority countries, but because of the value proposition that Islamic finance offers. And then obviously there's a lot of government support, and this is primarily seen in Muslim majority countries. So countries such as Malaysia, where you have the central bank having established research academies to help develop the industry. They also have programs that educate the investors, and has tried to establish itself as a international Islamic financial hub. So you have countries such as Malaysia, but as I've mentioned, countries such as the UK that have been also very interested and has had a great support. Back in 2013, we had, under the Prime Minister David Cameron, the first Islamic bond, which was listed under the London Stock Exchange. So you have interesting, I will share this just very quickly, countries such as Japan that realized that there's a huge Muslim population that wants to come and visit Japan, and how could they tap into that market in terms of developing their tourism industry. And so what they did is they studied what the principles were and then built those into their tourism industry and began to record almost 20 million visitors, I think, back in 2016, 2017. Again, as a value, these initiatives are coming from government. Our own country, Kenya, there's been great support from government, especially via the capital regulatory authorities, where they've tried to establish amendments, create opportunities for developing Islamic finance. Of course, much needs to be done, but at least a few steps have been taken in that direction. And then acceptance by conventional institutions. You have banks such as Standard Chartered having an Islamic window, Barclays Bank, which was the first Islamic window in Kenya back in 2005. I know now it's APSA. And others, you have HSBC having Islamic window, Citi. So big conventional institutions realizing that there is a gap that they also want to tap into, and finding ways to offer their services to this segment that wants to do business within their faith-based principles. And then there's diversification efforts. So whether it's investments, whether it's through philanthropy and building up structures of Islamic bonds and the like, real estate, and just to name a few. And then there's the role of enabling institutions, and I've alluded to that. So whether it's your financial services, whether it's the regulatory authorities, whether it's legal advice, accounting firms that are all creating an ecosystem that allows for the development of Islamic finance. And then, of course, there's an increasing propensity for Sharia compliant finance. An interesting study or a piece of work that we were engaged in Malaysia showed that Islamic finance is tapped into primarily by not the Muslim population, which of course is working in Islamic finance, but by your Chinese and Indian businessmen, because they see the benefit of tapping into Islamic finance from a value proposition perspective. Now, what are these investment opportunities? Well, there's incredible investing financial services. I mentioned very briefly the tourism sector, but I'll give an example of investing in the halal food. And halal here basically comes just from the word of pure, not having anything that's not compliant. As we've mentioned, the industry operates within a faith-based structure. And so halal food is where the food, there's an assurance that the food is done in an ethical and Islamic compliant way. And we have countries such as South Korea, and I'm giving these examples just to showcase that it is an industry that is growing and has been tapped into by people from all walks of life. So within the halal food industry, we have countries such as South Korea establishing huge abattoirs, to take care of the slaughtering of chicken, creating an environment where they can keep chicken in a way that is compliant to Muslims. And then they signed a deal with the Abu Dhabi government, I think back in 2016 or 17, for over $160 million for 5 years to send chicken to Abu Dhabi. And this is again based on the halal concept of noticing that there's a business opportunity and investing in it. So you have countries such as South Korea, Brazil, Australia that have realized this and have developed systems and structures to allow for that process to go on. Investing in modest clothing is one. Modest is a word where both Muslim men and women are meant to carry themselves in a certain manner. And this is a business that has definitely grown. We had our first accepted model, Halima Aden, back in 2018, who was the first hijabi or scarf wearing Muslim woman. And through that, it has normalized the businesses. So you have big brands, small brands, all wanting to tap into this modest clothing business. And so there's an investment opportunity there. There's investing in halal media, investing in both commercial driven investments, social impact, and hybrid product. An interesting project that happened in Kenya was we had Islamic funds, very specific funds called zakah or almsgiving. So these are funds that are given to support the community better, uplift the community. And there was a deal between the Kenya Red Cross and the International Federation of the Red Cross, working very closely with the Malaysian, a state in Malaysia, to offer funds and funds to help uplift the Kenyan community who are experiencing drought and famine challenges, which is a scenario we have every other year in our country. And these funds were used for impact, and it was meant to holistically support the community. So they bought green grams or dengu, as we understand it in Kenya, and which is a fast-selling cash crop. And these funds were used, bought seeds for the community, allowed the community to plant it, and then they went on to sell it and take care of the other obligations. So we see that there's investment opportunities both for commercial purposes, but also social impact and hybrid products. Now, it goes without saying that there's always challenges in this type of business, and that I think both coming out of the report as well as just ground experience, lack of awareness goes without saying. More often than not, I still to this day get the question of, is Islamic finance for everybody, or is it only for Muslims? Within the Muslim community, even if the process is followed, so you have a financial institution, there could be a Sharia board or an Islamic
Rama,
board. Yes, sorry?
You have less than 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and so lack of awareness is very key. So the community, whether it's within the Muslim community or outside, there's just general lack of awareness and information. And how do we tackle that? Goes without saying, education, capacity building is very, very critical because we need to combat this. Market research, and I think this report is critical in at least highlighting the gaps that are there. So trying to understand what the market needs, how best to support the market is critical. Then building strong regulatory frameworks goes without saying. The best countries that are developing in the industry and developing their systems are those that are putting frameworks in place. And then we always learn best when we share experiences. So sharing best practices, I think these are general solutions that we can begin with. And the opportunities highlighted in this report, we have market opportunities and tech-enabled investments. My colleagues have mentioned this, it's critical. There is a demand for investment products, but there's also a need for solutions. There's a growing need for Sharia compliant investments, and there's a growing need for Islamic finance and the Islamic economy in general. We have people who are interested in plain vanilla products, but there are also those who care about hybrid products, that has a commercial element and that has a social impact or a philanthropic element. And I think, thank you for that.
All right, thank you, Rama. I know you crossed by a few minutes by your time, but very detailed presentations there from all the panelists, and we appreciate the time you put in to put together these very insightful presentations. Well, just want to thank you all as we want to transition into a Q&A session, and I can tell you the forum has a lot of interests. We have quite a number of questions being sent in on our chat platform, and I'd like to quickly just highlight some of the questions. In the interest of time, there's a question here from Amadala from the Star newspaper, and he's having a very interesting question around matters to do with the diaspora remittances. And he begins by saying, good afternoon, this is Victor Amadala from the Star, very timely conversation, and surely around diaspora remittances. And he's asking, are there any countries in Africa or worldwide that have tapped remittance inflows for development? How did they do it? And that's one of the questions we have directed to any of our panelists. Another question we have is for Jeff from, it's actually a question that was directed to Jeff, if you can respond to that question and make it brief. Thank you. Then we can take two more questions, then we proceed. Jeff, are you online? Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm online.
Or Sami can take it up.
Yeah, so like I said, yeah, like I said, I think the question is, let me read the question for those that may not have seen the question. I think it's a question from Patrick, asking what are the new and exciting segments the diaspora investors have expressed interest in. So definitely there's a lot of, there's a lot of interest that has gone or is still going into traditional sectors, including real estate, agriculture, education, finance, definitely. But we see also a lot of interest now going into, some of the other sectors, such as renewable energy, food and agri, still a big. Education also quite big, a lot of interest also, and especially because of this impact desire to see to direct investments towards more impact-driven investments. So water, sanitation, health, waste sectors, all these circularity sectors coming on. So these are some of the more emerging sectors that are coming up, and there's a lot of interest going into those sectors as well.
All right, thank you, Jeff, for that very elaborate answer. There's a question here from the same, that was actually a question from Owili. Let's get back to Amadala, who's asking, diaspora remittances continue to be Kenya's leading foreign earner. There is a huge pile of this chunk that is untraced since it passed through informal transmission structures away from formal transaction channels like Western Union, MoneyGram, and mobile money transfer channels like M-Pesa, which are deemed expensive. How can Kenya formalize small transactions coming from casual workers, especially in the Gulf? Quite a deep question there. I'd like to open it up to my speakers and my panelists to weigh in on this. Perhaps we can have Samuel or Anne to respond to this. Let's give Anne.
Actually, I want to call in Juliet because I know they have done extensive work around diaspora remittances from FSD, and they have done a couple of research and gathered insight around different remittances corridor across the region. I also know that they are doing some work with Central Bank currently right now regarding diaspora remittances, if I can give my comment. So Juliet.
Okay, thank you. So what I would, sorry, 1 second, challenge here, screen, okay, yeah. So I believe the question was around how can we get the informal remittances coming in? Is that correct?
Question, yes, the question was, despite the remittances that are coming through the formal channels, there is also a huge chunk of remittances that are coming through informal. How can we formalize and increase and reduce the cost of remittances that are coming through informal because of the cost that is attributed to remittances inflow?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so some of the things that we've seen is, there's a reason that people are using informal channels. There's a business case for them. What we would like to see happen in the market is, or rather, some of the challenges in the market is, even for a remittance service provider to come into the market, the process of getting approval is quite lengthy and it's not standardized. So one of the things we would like to see is these processes to get simplified and more standardized, especially if they can be. What happens currently is that if you're a remittance service provider or international money transfer company, you want to come into the market, you have to partner with either a bank or a telco, and so each time, for example, a bank wants to partner with a money transfer company, they have to go for approval to the regulator. So if you're doing 2 this year, another 2 next year, it's a very lengthy process. In some markets, what we've seen is that the regulator provides guidelines, standardized guidelines, to the banks and to the telcos, that then allow the banks and telcos to actually do their own due diligence internally, so they don't have to go to the regulator each time. And then what happens at the end of this process, the regulator the bank or the telco can just sends in a report and says, I've onboarded this other money transfer provider. So those are some of the things we'd like to see in the market when it comes to making entry into the market easier. And maybe that could lead to a reduction of informal channels.
All right, very articulately answered there, and appreciate it. Thank you, Julia. We have another bunch of questions. There's a question here being asked by Elizabeth, and she's asking how much of Kenyan remittances have been invested in capital markets. A question being directed to Sam, if you can respond to this.
Thank you for the same. So, so we didn't look into the specifics in terms of the actual volume that goes into that has been invested in the stock market. But if you look at the respondents, in terms of the response, some of they said, for every dollar, how much of that goes into the money market? They said 29% of that goes into the stock, basically the money market. So I don't want to say that is sort of like an exact indicator, but it kind of like signals, where they're investing. That 1% is into their own businesses, where they have shareholding, 28% into relatives, 29% into money market. So, but we didn't look specifically at the actual volume that goes into the stock market. So maybe something to look at as it depends really on how the granularity of the data that is basically picked by financial institutions or remittance companies in terms of the use of funds. Yeah, but that kind of gives us an indication somehow.
Well, thank you, Sam, for that question, that response. I think I can take one last one here from Ayub Mwangi, and that previous question was from Elizabeth from Business Daily. Thank you for your question. A question here from Ayub Mwangi to Sam again. He's asking, beyond Optiven, what is the general reputational outlook of companies handling diaspora investments? Give us a snapshot of that.
Yeah, very good. Very good question. Again, that we didn't really go into specific in terms of asking what companies, using specific names of companies. But I think you've used Optiven, so I think the question we can answer that question by reversely asking ourselves, why has Optiven been successful? One is because it appears to be a professionally run business that does transparent business in terms of the land that they buy. They do proper due diligence to ensure that the land they're buying to subdivide and then sell to both Kenyans locally here as well as in the diaspora. That is, doesn't have any issues at all. So when you buy that land, you're not going to have problems later when the seller has left and you're facing legal issues. Number two, transparency in terms of ensuring how the transactions are done, in terms of what are the costs involved in the transaction in purchasing the land. And really, number three is really just delivering on the promise. So and really comparing that to really the issues that Jeff highlighted about not just information asymmetry, but just the need for reliable, accurate, and credible information. So to answer you in a different way, for a company to be favorably looked upon by the diaspora as a channel for investment, they have to be credible, they have to be transparent, they have to deliver on their promise, and they really have to be consistent in terms of how they provide this information. The moment you get into situations, negative image, definitely you lose trust there. And it's telling that many of the diaspora have actually burned their fingers by using family and friends. But surprisingly, based on the research, 36% of the respondents actually saying that they rely on friends and family to provide them with information. Why? Because underpinning that is the issue of trust. So that information must be trusted. So we have to deliver on all those aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. And last but not least, there's a question here from Jonas, a question directed to Rama. She's saying, great insights, Rama. What are the different ways we can drive more innovation within Islamic finance in Kenya and the region? And what are the barriers holding us back? Rama, over to you.
Thank you, and I'll try to keep it short.
All right.
I think, first of all, I'll start with the barriers. What's holding us back is, as I've mentioned, a lack of awareness, understanding what the market needs, and even more important, understanding what the investors and the investees need. So some intense research is needed, further research in this regard, because the lack of awareness is very critical. I initially started my conversation by saying that it's a value proposition and it's open for everybody. And most of the questions we're receiving is people asking whether it is open for everybody. So I think education, capacity building is very, very critical. And then I think what's important is understanding that Islamic finance is a very trust-based industry. So how the products are developed, how they are marketed, how they are taught, how they are processed, the entire chain must be very transparent so that there is no gray area, because this can lead to confusion and lack of trust, which could mean that people don't want to be part of the industry. What can we do to drive more innovation within Islamic finance in Kenya? And I think once we deal with lack of education, building capacity, understanding what the investors need, is developing infrastructure that allows for these investment products and innovative products to exist and to be sustainable. And I think this is the first step with the work that's being carried out. And then it's critical for us to have systems, so using technology to push and drive this products and opportunities. And then it is to demystify that Islamic finance goes across the entire economy, which is what we focused in on the report. It's not just real estate or commodities, for example, but there really is other opportunities, and understanding what these opportunities are, I think, will allow us to create more innovative and exciting work within the industry. I hope that that answers it.
Oh yes, you've done justice to that question. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like us to transition into another exciting moment out of this validation workshop. And I'd like to take us to the panel session. We've heard from the speakers. We've also heard from the participants who've shared their questions, very detailed questions, I must say. And I'm really, really convinced that after this webinar, things won't be the same. Well, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce one of our panelists this afternoon. We have Reginald Katzutu, the Chief Executive Officer at Amara Capital, and he'll be addressing us in a short while. Also coming up in our panel, we have Ken Kishinga, a familiar face to some of us, and also a resident analyst with KTN News. He's the chief economist at Mentoria Economics. He'll be also giving us some of his perspectives in a short while. We're also delighted to have with us Elena Sahilin. I hope I pronounced it right. She's the regional program specialist for CEDA, and exciting times indeed to have some perspectives as well from her. We're also delighted to have with us Juliet Mburu, who will be also giving us some perspectives in regards to this very, very important subject. And last but not least, we also have with us Sophie, beg your pardon, we have with us Sophie. All right, just give me a second for that. All right, sorry, I was actually looking forward to having Sophie as well. She had already made her remarks in the earlier sessions, but that doesn't stop her from also chipping in as we progress with this session. Well, without much ado, I'd like to invite also to highlight, we have with us Juliet Mburu, Program Manager, Digital Payments, FSD Kenya. She'll be also giving us some insights into this very important session. Well, allow me to first begin with Reginald Katsutu. And he's also one of the key speakers that has managed to whip up some interesting narratives in the country. My question to you, listening to the earlier speakers and of course the caliber of questions coming through, how can we convey financial knowledge to the senders and recipients of remittances about how to invest their money and while at it, make the best decisions out of it? Over to you, Reginald.
Thanks, Abi, for that question, and for the other panelists that have spoken. In terms of how do we bridge information asymmetry, is a key question in any investment, where the people inside the business, in this case, since we're talking about SMEs, have more information than the investor, and most of the times more information to the detriment of the investor. We need to be able to aggregate the diaspora in a way that information can be provided to them and reduce this asymmetry. And how do you do that? How do you reduce information asymmetry? How do you digitize SME information, one, about the owners of the business, secondly, what type of transactions they're doing, their tax compliance, and all these other things? How do you put it in an enterprise bus where an investor can log in and view the level of sales that have happened, the level of procurement or the process of procurement that are happening in the SME? So I think if we're going to get diaspora remittances to get into SME or MSME business, work has to be done on digitizing SME information, which is pertinent to any investor. Because if I'm going to invest, I want to know who's running this organization. I want to know what type of products are they selling, what revenues did they make last month, what did they buy in terms of capital expenditure, in terms of that. Do they have any other debt that they've taken on top of what I've already given them, if I gave them debt or equity? So it's all that information that is needed for an investor who is 1,000 miles away to feel like they're actually part of the organization. So Abi, in a simple statement, we need to find a way of how do we digitize the information for the SMEs and the MSMEs, either in a cloud or enterprise system or in a digitized kind of ledger way where someone can log in, choose an investment based on full information about the business specifically, going in there.
Thanks, Reginald, for that very deep overview of just what needs to happen. I like the fact that you say we need to think how we can digitize the SMEs. Very pertinent issue there. Let me bring in Ken Kishinka. And Ken, listening to all this very relatable information, you handle a lot of data and you're a data person. Perhaps just walk us through a few studies have previously proposed and suggested that families receiving cash from the diaspora can access better health facilities, obtain better education, and have better access and lower poverty levels compared to those who do not. What's your view on this?
Many thanks, Abby. This has been a very insightful presentation, and many thanks to the organizers for bringing this together. I have been a member of the diaspora at some point. I once lived in Seattle. So I do identify sort of the needs of the diaspora as they try and think about investments in Kenya. Now, a couple of things, I think, first of all, Abby, have come up. I think it's the issue of information asymmetry. And there are two types of information asymmetry. There is one about the state of the economy, the state of business, and there's one about now specific business entities. Now, the one about the state of the economy, I don't think it exists anymore. The world is more digital now. People have access to all the tools on YouTube to be able to follow. I mean, most of the big stations here have a live stream, and you can follow conversations such as this online. So I think that has disappeared. But there's that information symmetry about the specific business that you want to have. And I don't think somebody in Kenya has any advantage over somebody in the diaspora because, as Reginald says, this is an SME owner who has the books of the business and is the one who knows really what are the landmines within the business. So that, in a sense, applies to both an investor in Kenya and an investor abroad. But what I really think is a big gap is what I call agency. Agency is the biggest challenge. What the investor in Kenya has over the diaspora, he has a level of agency. He can go to that business owner, ask him, hey, I'm interested in investing in your business. Can I see your books? Can we have a cup of coffee? Now, that's not something that somebody in the diaspora has. When I lived in Seattle, I would come to Kenya maybe in December for about 2 weeks. That's the maximum you can get from your employer. And at that time, 2 weeks in December, first of all, December is a horrible time to discuss business. People are in a holiday mood, so any serious conversation is not there. But in those 2 weeks, you're trying to visit family, you're trying to go to vacation. So pretty much you have like 2 or 3 days to be able to understand what's going on with these businesses in an environment that is in a holiday mood and people don't want to do. So I think that agency is what the diaspora has. That's the biggest challenge that the diaspora has. And how do you cure for that? I've always said the most efficient way has to be able to get these small businesses to join the capital markets. And the Capital Markets Authority, I think, is a missing elephant in this conversation. We should have somebody from the Nairobi Securities Exchange, because once you have SMEs that are able to list their stocks on the stock market, then it becomes easier through technology for now the diaspora to buy shares in those companies because they know the due diligence has been done for them, the pricing has been done for them. So all they need is an interface, a technological interface to be able to buy shares, to buy stocks in those. I know the CMA had come up with an Ibuka program a few years ago, but it hasn't really worked. I know homeboys are listed, but it hasn't really worked. So I think the key question is we have to answer is, why is it that Kenyan businesses find it difficult to list on the stock exchange? What are the gaps that needs to be filled? Because that's the most efficient way of them to be able to tap onto these 3 billion diaspora remittances in an efficient way, because no diaspora person has the time to be able to look through your books day in, day out, to look through your reports. I think one of the things that you've mentioned in terms of the benefits that come, I think the benefits that come with attracting diaspora remittances are similar to the benefits that you get when you list money, when you list on the stock exchange and you get capital from investors. Number one, you're forced to be transparent. Number two, you have good bookkeeping. Number three, you have to issue information frequently. So I think the big step forward, we have to ask ourselves, what is it that is making it difficult for SMEs to list on the stock exchange so that they can efficiently tap into these diaspora remittances? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ken, for your views on this very hot subject, I must say, diaspora remittances. And I'm sure next time NSC will be part of the team. I can see Madam Anne nodding to this. Well, we want to go to another very important panelist, and this is none other than Elena Sahlin, who is from CEDA, and a lot of great conversations coming out from the various speakers, and of course, even the journalists were floating their questions and the participants. But according to the report, when it comes to exploring of investments, the most common challenges indicated by the diaspora surveyed included delays in processing earnings upon maturity, non-responsiveness, and poor communication from investment managers or vehicles they had invested in, among others. How can this be reconciled in a space and time where we're seeing a lot of interest in diaspora sending money back home?
Well, thank you so much, and good afternoon. It has been very interesting to listen to all of the participants, and I think it's a very important question, and I don't think I have maybe an entire answer to this yet. We're still in a stage where we explore how we will be able to support and work together with Pangea to overcome the challenges that have been highlighted in this report, and this being one of them. We have been discussing what financial actors we would need to engage in order to overcome this particular challenge. I think it's very important to engage a financial partner that is well known by many people, an established bank or any other intermediary that people trust and maybe have already a relationship with, not by maybe having an account, but maybe having relatives or family or friends who has a relationship with that partner. And as CEDA, we have different kind of programs that we already support and that we're planning to support. And our ambition is to use the partnerships that we already have in place, that we trust, that we have been having for many years, and to connect Pangea with these partners. And I'm also thinking about the financial sector and the financial partners where we have other initiatives with. So we will definitely explore more and have more talks about it, but we have a couple of names of financial organizations that I think might give that trust that is lacking right now. Thank you. I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Elena, for that very candid feedback and just what we need to do to be able to straighten things up. Very, very insightful indeed. Well, let me transition next to Juliet Mburu. Juliet Mburu is from FSD, and she'll be, of course, at the epicenter of all this when you look at a very important subject around remittances. The Central Bank of Kenya did note that the ease of sending money back home has improved, and it also contributes largely to the growth of remittances if we'll have easy models on platforms to send money back home. But I just want to hear from you in regards to this, looking at the levels that we have reached in regards to diaspora remittances, what more can we do to smoothen this? And also with the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, what are some of the areas that require adjustments in the banking sector to be able to ensure we don't lose the momentum?
Yeah, Abby, thanks for the question. And thank you once again for this very interesting mapping study. Great insights. So when it comes to the ease of sending money home, money to Kenya, I think great strides have been made in this area. It's evident from the way the remittances have increased. But I like to look at ease as look at all the players, look at the whole value chain. So it has to be easy for the sender, it has to be easy for the recipient, and it also has to be easy for the people that make this happen. So the organizations in the middle that make this happen, the operators. So for the sender, of course, ease is around, speed. How fast can the funds get to whoever I'm sending them to? How secure are these funds? Will the funds get there? And when they get there, will the person get what I expect them to get? And things around total cost. And this includes, the transaction fees, the forex has to be taken into consideration, any taxes that the senders have to pay. For the receiver, it's also around the speed, access to the funds. So where can I get these funds? How easy is it for me? And what's the cost of me getting the funds? In some cases, people have to travel long distances to be able to get the funds. As we know, Kenya is heavily a cash economy. So a lot of these funds, as soon as a cost, is there a fee to me getting this? A cost also includes whether there's a fee to you getting these funds out. And of course, for the remittance service providers and the international money transfer organizations, ease includes things like the ease of doing business. How easy is it to get into this market? What are the costs of providing these services? How easy is it to partner with the different organizations locally? How competitive can I be? So there's a lot of factors, and I think there's some strides in all of them, in all these areas. But of course, there's some areas that are more have been more successful than others. Looking at the financial sector as a whole, and I want to look at it as the financial sector, not the banking sector. I see two roles there. There's one whereby the financial sector actually provides financial services. So how can these funds be used? The diaspora, they're looking for financial services that they can invest in. So how can these funds be channeled there? But secondly, and I think we've addressed that in a lot of the previous discussions, but the one I want to sort of focus on is around the enabling environment. How can we, as a financial sector, we're also the ones who are enabling the funds to come in. So how can that be improved? We've already talked about making new entrants into the market, make it easier for new players to come into the market. Of course, that will increase competition, which hopefully also drives costs down. We're just about to embark on a study on informal flows. Those are not captured in the central bank report because they're informal and they're very hard to capture. But how can we move a lot of those flows into more formalized channels? There's when you talk about remittances, there's a lot about risk. There's a huge red flag around AML, CFT. So how can that be improved? So could we have a central, can reporting be centralized so that all the players, submit maybe daily reports to a central regulator who looks at this and sort of picks out and has, through intelligence, now there's all this business intelligence tools where you can flag high risk transactions. So can that be something that's in the market? Also things around how can we make it easier for how can we improve efficiencies for these transactions? And by this I mean, for example, if you're an international money remittance company, you have to open banks, international accounts with international banks. Is there a way that Kenya, the government, can lobby so that it's much easier for these money transfer companies to open these bank accounts in those foreign countries, especially where there's the corridors, there's high flows to Kenya? Is there something that can be done around that to improve efficiencies? And of course, this all translates down to cost. And then even just locally, how can we improve efficiencies locally? What happens currently is that every bank has to connect to every other bank and every other telco. Is there a need for a central maybe a switch or a central way whereby once you're connected to, and we've seen this in other markets, once you're connected to this central platform, money can be transferred to any other bank account, any other telco wallet easily without each and every bank or telco connecting to each other. It's a lot of inefficiencies are lost there, a lot of duplication of infrastructure. And also for the financial sector, how do we keep the money digital? Why are people still, why do people need to cash out? Can we just keep the money digital and make it easier and cheaper for people to then use the money in a digital format? So those are some of the things I'd like to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Very compact answers there and very articulate. Well, we are almost coming to the tail end of our sessions today, but before we wrap it up, let me quickly scan through the chat platform and a number of questions coming in. I see your questions, Felix, Valerie, and in the interest of time, I will not be able to take all the questions, but there's one burning question here directed to Anne, a question from Victor Amadala. He's asking, the Capital Markets Authority has been dreaming of a diaspora bond for the past 5 years. Do you think this is a delayed opportunity to up investment of diaspora inflows that is otherwise spent on household needs? Over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Abby. And to answer, I may not have all the full extent of that question, but one of the things that I would want to point out is, as we have been having these dialogues with different stakeholders. I know Nairobi Stock Exchange and Capital Market Authority has been key stakeholders that we have been deliberating with. And the reason for this is we wanted to say, can we create a bridge towards, we know that most of the remittances that are flowing into the country and to the region are towards household consumption. What are the key incentives can we put in place to, one, increase remittances that can be set aside for utilization or for investment? Secondly, not only focusing on SMEs and startups, can we create success stories that can be showcased for even listing businesses in Nairobi Stock Exchange? And if we are able to create success stories that we are able to communicate and be able to showcase that the existing investment opportunities that not only lie with assets or the remittances that comes in for household utilization can also be set aside. You can, you can consolidate and create a fund or a pool of investments that can be significant to invest in success stories in Nairobi Stock Exchange. So the dialogue, for what we have seen is, one, are we able to, because they're success stories, but are we able to put more of success stories enough to be able to create incentives? That is one. Secondly, are there enough collaboration between different stakeholders and be able to collaborate and create leverage on different initiatives that are ongoing? Are we providing sufficient information on other available investment opportunities that different diaspora groups can be able to utilize or explore as investment opportunities? And for us, that's where we come in as Pangea. And I have also seen a question, where does Pangea fit in all this, and what is Pangea role? And for us, what we are doing as Pangea Trust is, one, recognizing that there is a huge opportunity in terms of mobilizing diaspora remittances, mobilizing diaspora networks and community, one, in a structure that they can be able to channel their remittances in a manner that can be available for businesses for investment. Secondly, the other thing we are doing is identifying businesses On the other front, identifying startup and SMEs across the region, starting with Kenya, Somalia for now, and Ethiopia for our pilot, making them investor ready, because one of the questions that have come out right now is that, or rather the insight that have been shared is to increase investment opportunities in business, the business have to have proper business etiquettes addressed, and for that, we play a big role in ensuring, are they investor ready? Do they have the required, have they been supported in terms of having the right business model? Are they keeping the proper books of records? Have they, do they have technical teams? Are they able to scale? Can they be able to demonstrate this business opportunity and be able to package it in a manner that is understandable to investment community? And that's the role we are playing. One, mobilize the capital itself and turn it into investment. Secondly, capacity build the businesses to be in a place where they can be able to be invested in. And that's where we also see an opportunity to collaborate, for example, and I know Nairobi Stock Exchange have an incubator and an accelerator, but we can create a pipeline of business that can be able to bridge over to Nairobi Stock Exchange, maybe to join the incubator, and because I know it works like a sandbox to test out different aspects of the business as they grow to the next level. And those are the collaborations and leveraging opportunities that I see with different players and stakeholders that we are working with. So, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Anne Lawi from Pangea Trust. Well, ladies and gentlemen, just before we wrap up, I'd like to invite again Sophie Beghound from to actually give us an overview, really. And of course, the validation report workshop is coming to a close at this juncture. And just give us your sentiments. What is your general assessment, and what can we do differently in regards to this very important sector that can be a key game changer for our country?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. Yeah, I think this has been a very interesting webinar and discussion. And I thank you all for sharing and providing input. I think that has been the main purpose of this validation workshop, to really get your insights and to get your feedback in really trying to take this report findings further in this initiative. And as I said, we want to share what we are doing in Kenya with other countries in Africa and also globally, eventually, hopefully. So I just want to thank you all for attending this workshop, and for Pangea Trust to arranging it, and for Abby for hosting us.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, if we were in a room, would have clapped all of us. Perhaps you can still clap wherever we are from. All right, that almost sums it up for our webinar. I know some of you are still keen to have your questions answered, but in the interest of time, we'll be allowing more of our questions to be handled by our digital team, because we don't want to leave any stone unturned, and ensure that you get a full response from the Pangea team as well. And I can see Madam Anne, she wants to chip in on that front briefly.
I just wanted to mention, I have also seen a lot of questions around when can I get the presentation, when can I get the report, where do I get the report? We'll be sharing widely after inputting all your insights and your feedback that we have had today. We'll be sharing widely the report on our social media platform, all the hashtags that have been shared today, and Abby will be sharing with you again. If you can follow us on all our social media platforms, we will be widely distributing the report. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Anne, for that. And from me, I think this has been such a I open up the session, and thank you for the Pangea Trust team, CEDA, who have been very instrumental in putting this together, and also the other various stakeholders from the different areas of interest. We had very robust participation from all the panelists, the speakers as well. We don't take them lightly. And let's just give a round of applause to all of them. That includes Samuel Ndonga, Jeff Temba, Rama Hersi, Reginald Katsutu, Ken Gishinga, Elana Sahin, Juliet Mburu, Sophie Berghout. Thank you so much for your active participation. I know having a session virtually in the afternoon, especially after you've had your lunch, it might be quite a Herculean task to be still very active, but this has been very, very engaging, I must say, in terms of your questions are very apt, your responses were very spot on to the panelists and the speakers. And I mean, we might have needed more time than the time we were allocated, but really good thing, it has to come to an end. And on my behalf, as one of the key stakeholders as well, it has been a pleasure just helping unpack this very gray area. I hope most of us now have a better understanding after looking at the report, which has some very detailed insights, which will be shaping a lot of our focus in the coming weeks and months. I know most of the journalists have gotten very good content out of this. If you haven't gotten any content, please follow the Pangea Trust for more on this. Well, for me, it's bye-bye for now, and I hope to engage with all of us sooner, not later. And keep safe, and let's keep engaging. My name is Apia Gina. Such a pleasure to be with all of you. And that's where we bring it to a close. Until next time, bye-bye.